Hello, neighbor. I'm Robert Burns, and welcome once again to another edition of Sound Off Louisiana. And we are once again outside of federal court in New Orleans. I have with me Miss Belinda Parker Brown, without whom I never would have known about the entirety of this Shiva Akula criminal trial. I'm going to really defer to her to cover today. I will briefly just say that the prosecution wrapped up, the defense began, and Dr. Akula took the stand. So I'm going to kind of let her take over and give her the full limelight. I was there for it. Now, if you want, I'll occasionally chime in, but I'll stand
Robert.
with you.
Right,
I'm going to let you do all the talking.
Well, again, Robert, I just want to appreciate Sound Off Louisiana, you being here. I know how, the day 1, day 2, day 3, and how important it is for you to be here to cover this very important trial of Dr. Akula. Had you not be here, Robert, we would not have this opportunity to tell the people, what's going on here in the courtroom.
Sure.
And so far, I'm telling you, there has been a decent amount of people showing up, I would say, especially today.
Oh, yeah, there were more people today, for sure.
That are very interested in the outcome of this case. But most importantly, this is day 4.
It is.
And the government rests their case today, like you said, Robert, and the defense, took on their position and called their first witness, which was Dr. Akula's
Actually, he was
brother.
the second.
But yeah, the first witness was Dr. Akula's brother, and my observation of him that he was a very good witness for Dr. Akula. He basically rolled out the business operation and his job responsibilities, and how that Dr. Akula ran his company. So I just want to say that the surprise to us was that Dr. Akula took the stand today, Robert.
It is, but let me elaborate just a little bit more about the brother.
Yeah.
He has an MBA, okay? So he's very knowledgeable about business practices, and he worked under a contractual basis. So he's an independent contractor because the prosecution wanted to make the point of, well, okay, what happens if this isn't around? And he said, well, if it isn't around, I've got other contracts. I'm an independent contractor.
Right.
I just wanted to add that, the educational background.
And then in the beginning, the prosecutor was trying to, the government, they were trying to show that, that it was a big deal about Dr. Akula having his family,
sure,
there working with him. I know that it's nothing wrong. A family-owned business is something that I grew up. My grandmother ran her own candy store.
Sure.
And, we all were given tasks to do. So I know what it's like to have that family, relationship in a business. It's very important.
Mm-hmm.
It makes things a whole lot more trustworthy when and then they also tried to make like it was a big deal that Dr. Akula was, very successful in making
they most
money,
certainly did.
And making money and profits in his business, and then that also about the fact that he was bringing his family members under his visa to.
Yep, and I touched on that. I touched on that in the previous broadcast. That was brought out by Bruce. His last name was Bruce. Joshua Bruce, the nephew.
Yeah, the nephew, right.
So yeah. But they reiterated that again today.
Yeah, they kept reiterating that.
They reiterated a lot of stuff.
Having something to do with, fraud. But, I just really, see that when Dr. Akula took the stand, Robert, that was a kind of surprise to us.
It was very much a surprise.
We didn't anticipate that. We didn't have any idea that Dr. Akula would be taking the stand on his behalf. But he did a fantastic job. You were sharing with me, Robert, that what you want to say,
99.98% of the time you're not going to have the defendant take the stand. I don't know what his attorney may have advised on that. I do know that Dr. Akula calls his own shots in that regard. And under direct examination, let me just point this out. There were a number of defense exhibits, okay, that the prosecution did not want entered into evidence, okay? All of these were emails from Sue May, and there were about 5 that wound up being introduced because the judge overruled. Now, they had to have the little sidebar and all of this. But the bottom line is you're seeing an awful lot of emails of Sue May giving updates on the transition from the paper records to the electronic records and things of this nature. So she was very much the misnomer that Raj, the brother-in-law, was overall of the billing is just flat not accurate, because Sue May, as the administrator, is copying all these folks on these emails, including Dr. Akula. So she was very much active in that whole transition. They did ask, they said, well, now were there some, and I think this was on direct, I'm pretty sure it was, were there some hiccups or some problems in that? Well, yeah, he said, yeah, there was a lot of problems. And,
it was right.
Yeah, he said, you're trying to put the code in, and he said it was just a problem.
Right.
But we were working to get them all, fixed. And look, I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
And then we're going to get back onto the.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh Lord, look, I know that healthcare is complicated. All right. In terms of the government requirements and whatnot, but Dr. Akula at one point said, look, I've seen so much stuff here that I don't know what you can and can't do. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I felt the same way. And I've already said that they've made a big point about, look, it's a per diem rate on the hospice, okay? Well, all I know is my mother was in hospice, as I think I've told everyone, for 25 months. I'm pretty sure we did it on the last video. And of course, they said 6 months, that sends up a red flag. My mom had to be recertified because they talked about the recertification. That's every 6 months.
Right.
But I'm going to just tell you something, folks. And I still have the statements I got from Medicare on her behalf. Okay? I'm going to upload them.
Right.
And I'm going to make them viewable. Everybody can just go in and look at these things, because all I know is there's an awful lot of charges for individual physicians' billings. And I'm certainly not prepared to say that my hospice folk committed fraud, but all I know is, and I have talked with other folk in the courtroom to make sure I'm not going senile or going a little crazy, that an individual visit by the doctor cannot be billed on top of. Now, and look, you talk about a jumbled up mess on this stuff. As I pointed out, they also were saying that, well, patient is normal, as opposed to crisis, because apparently, and I mentioned there must be a different rate. Well, that's what the government, remember those facts that it was $104, $104, $104, $104? Well, that's what they showed by this spreadsheet. They changed the code, and you can see what happens on the column. That's the way spreadsheets work. So that's the difference, difference between the two codes, 104, 104, 104, 104. But I'm just telling you that
it's almost like you hit a button, and it's like you almost get this ripper effect where, so I kind of felt like, when, Dr. Akula was trying to, figure out what was going on with, after he received the audit, that, that this was unfair, not, that there was some errors.
There were documentation problems, and they had another
Right.
expert who, by the way, revealed the fact that she's billed out at $500 an hour, of which
Right.
she gets $400,
and a lump sum, was it 30,000 that she got?
oh no, I'll take your word for it.
Right,
I didn't.
yeah.
I have no
And
notes,
then,
folks.
And then $500 an hour. Wow. Plus
Well, and I love the little joke that she's smiling that David made, Mr. Davis, the attorney,
The defense attorney.
the defense attorney. Once he got it clearly on the record that she was getting $500 an hour, even for what she's doing here today,
Right.
he said, "Well, now look, a moment ago the prosecution and the defense stipulated to all of these amounts. There's no need to go over them all because they're not in contest." And he said, I'm sorry I infringed on your income on there, because that would have been another $500. And the whole courtroom laughed.
Right.
So,
yeah. Another thing when Dr. Akula was on the witness stand, they had been referring to him as the little brown man.
they did bring that up.
And
they did bring that up.
I really appreciate his response. It just came over so sincere that in the beginning, he didn't see anything wrong with the fact that, he didn't take it to be negative. But then when he said that,
he said, well, I can help her out on that.
Yeah.
He was asked, first of all, it's a word starting with an E, and it means it's a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yes. But he said, no, wait a minute, you thought it was? And he said, well, maybe you need to tell me what that word means. And so, now y'all don't think we're dumb here in the South. I know the word, but it's not coming to me. But at any rate, he said, no, I'm asking you, did you look upon this favorably? He said, well, to be honest, it didn't bother me that much at first because I figured, okay, they just having fun, because, we have brown and we have black employees. And he said, but then later when I find out that, we're on this same team, we're all fighting together, and then I find out they're all stabbing me in the back.
Right, trying to screw me.
Well, yeah, he didn't use that word, but they try to stab, the whole time they're stabbing me in the back. Go ahead, you can pick it back up.
I just want to say that, he did a fantastic job, as being a witness in his own defense, and something that we don't normally see happen, especially,
It's very rare.
Yeah, it's very rare. But, I feel like Dr. Akula was very, honest and truthful in regards to he did not have a clue about, what was accurate, inaccurate, and then on top of all the chaos of him trying to correct and run a business such as, a hospice. One of the things that the prosecutor on redirect was,
on redirect? Okay.
On redirect.
Well, now the prosecutor would do cross when he was on the stand.
Cross. Okay,
yeah.
cross.
Yeah, it would be Mr. David that would do redirect.
Okay, right. Well, the prosecutor on cross, he tried to make it appear as though that Dr. Akula was so concerned about, having patients, making money, and not letting any of the patients be released. Mm-hmm. Whether or not they met, they had met the deadline of the payments.
And I'll elaborate a little bit on that.
Elaborate on that, Robert.
He testified that in several instances, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, he said they're notorious for this. Mm-hmm. You put in the request and they want to hold on to the money for 2 more days.
Right.
And he said, so it would be on a Friday. Well, we know it's going to be approved. And so I don't want the patient to be in pain for these 2 days. So I said, bring them in. Well, that's going to be one of those what I call technical exceptions.
Yes.
Never mind that, yes, it got approved. And I want to emphasize one thing. The prosecution repeatedly drilled in, or they just fixated on this, how much you're underpaying your employees. So you're way below the market rate. And
which
look,
didn't have anything to
well,
do with it. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And, you know, don't forget, we know one was making $140,000 a year. That was testified to, Miss Sue May. So I'm starting to wonder, how much do these folks make in the medical field? Must be a lot. But at any rate, because he's saying you're way under market, and that was pretty much across the board. And look, this is my take on that. It's a free market economy, okay?
Right.
If you're not happy with your level of pay, there's always the other opportunity. That's the way the market system works. And basically, well, the prosecutor did say it at one time. He said, by paying these below market rates, you're jeopardizing the whole firm, the whole existence of the firm. You know, and I'm thinking, I don't think the man would want to intentionally drive his deal in the ground. I loved one analogy he made, because they wanted to get his brother's salary, okay? And Mr. David objected to that.
Right.
Because he kept saying, it's a lot lower, isn't it? It's a lot lower. It's a lot lower, you know? And they wound up having to have one of those powwows, one of them sidebars, because Judge Afric said, well, Mr. David was challenged the relevancy of that. Just like you said, what's the relevance?
Right.
You know, and so they had to have one of them sidebars, and ultimately Judge Affleck sustained the objection. He said, look, I just don't see it. And I want to emphasize one other thing. I don't know what the nature of the document was, okay, but this is a document that the prosecution is wanting to enter, because once you put yourself on the stand, you're subject to cross, obviously.
Right.
And they really wanted this document in there, okay? Mr. David objected, and he said, look, he was not even party to this communication. You may remember I said, well, I don't see how he can not do anything but sustain the objection, because you can't cross-examine a document. You can cross-examine a witness,
right.
But if he's not party to it,
right.
And so another powwow, and
let's get back to the analogy that Dr.
I'm sorry.
Used, right?
Yes. Sometimes I need her to keep me in track.
Right.
But anyway, he denied it, so that record was not in. Thank you so much for that analogy. Because, again, he's harping on how little you pay your employees, And I love, because they pull out the point that, well, you made $1.1 million in this year, and you made $1.5 million in this year. He tried to say, yes, and look how much I gave out to charity. We're not talking about charity now. We're not talking about, I mean, anytime he tried to get in something to explain this that would be favorable, we're not talking about that. But at any rate, the point she had to remind me of when he kept saying, you're paying your underlings so much less. And he said, listen, if you're at a bank, do you pay the bank teller the same as you pay the president of the bank? I own the company, you know?
Right.
And I said, oh, wow. I said, oh, wow. I said, I can't think, and having done all of my career banking work, you know, and a bank examiner, I said, whoa, that was pretty darn sharp on the whip there. And yes, and he said, I want to stress one other thing. He said, we view our employees as family. He also said, well, yes, the base, because they want you to say, I need a yes or no out of you, you know. And he said, yes. He said, but I want to explain. And he said, you may explain. And he said, look, yes, the base salary is less, but we had incentives in place.
Yes.
For example, if you get a compliment from a family that we've cared for, you're going to get a bonus for that, because we want satisfied customers.
Right.
And so he said, it's not going to be just a flat, well, here's your salary and that's that. You know, so I thought that was also effective.
Absolutely. And that was, you know, because he was mostly trying to get them to understand and convey to the jury that, you know, his biggest concern was the care of the patients.
Correct.
And the satisfactory of the family. And when the prosecution was trying to hammer at putting words in his mouth, you know,
he said they did that one time. He said, "You're putting words in my mouth."
Right, because they was trying to get him to say that he was, you know, most concerned about the fact that he wanted more patients to get more money. And Dr. Akula was saying no, he wanted to be the best when it came to care for the patients.
Right.
So, that came over very well with the jury, that they knew that Dr. Akula was passionate about his work as not only a business owner of hospice, but also a doctor, that understood care for patients. And that was one of his reasons for, go ahead, Robert. Mm-hmm.
Well, and she just caused a thought to come to mind. That for whatever reason, they wanted to hammer in. Remember, we talked about Nurse George and the fact that she had said that, well, here he is saying that we need to take this gentleman in, and that was against my advice. Well, Dr. Akula explained that he had gotten a phone call from a psychiatrist, and he said, look, this guy is seriously mentally ill, and he is not eating, and he said he needs to be in hospice care. And he said, so I said, okay, we will admit. So in he comes, and he said 6 days later he did die of starvation.
Yes.
So, but
and they wanted to put him out.
Well, here's the thing: they were trying to say, so you had a registered. No, not registered nurse, the nurse practitioner.
Right.
Nurse practitioner who is certified in hospice, whereas you are a infectious disease person who is not certified in hospice, and here you are overruling her. And he said, but I want to emphasize the psychiatrist called, and he said that this person is mentally ill and is attempting to starve himself to death. So yes, I let the psychiatrist basically make the decision that, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about, So
over the nurse,
And
so because she was, but I think that the government was putting words in his mouth.
Well, yeah, it was. The questions were leading very frequently, and I know what everybody's going to ask. Well, did the attorney not object? And he did not, and I think there's a reason for that.
Absolutely.
I believe, I have no idea, I can't get inside Mr. David's mind, but I think he didn't object because he said if he wants to hang himself, I'm talking about the attorney, if he wants to hang himself.
And he was hanging himself.
By badgering, and wanting to throw the narrative out there.
And beat up on Dr. Akula on the witness stand, putting words in his mouth and all of that.
Correct.
And then when Dr. Akula, Kelly Anderson's credibility just went down the drain today when Dr. Akula talked about the fact that, they were basically plotting and planning behind his back.
Oh, yeah.
I saw that go down the drain, and the jury that didn't come over
and you're
for the prosecution at all.
And you're making an excellent point. Like I said, on cross, that means we know that several defense exhibits got in that had he not testified wouldn't have gotten in, but likewise the prosecution got a couple of documents in, one of which was an email from Kelly Anderson, and unfortunately I'm sitting on the front row, so I can pretty well, my eyesight's a lot better with these contacts, and it was a string on emails, and boy, Kelly Anderson was laying down the law, all right? She's telling Dr. Akula, who owns the company, that, look, this will stop ASAP, and it better not happen again. And I thought, and then I looked at the date.
Right.
I looked at the date, and then I said,
ding, ding.
This is shortly after she filed the QTAM.
That's right.
So in her mind, it's like, I run this show now. I was kind of floored when I saw the content of that email.
Yes.
But let me just say this, because I try to be fair and balanced on this. The prosecution did get in one document, and it was put up there for a while, and Dr. Akula had to thoroughly look over it, because what happened is they had a number of initial claims that were denied by Medicare, and then he filed an appeal. I don't know how many were, if I had to guess, probably about 20, 25. And they go through some 3-page deal about, why all this is being denied. But at the very end, and the prosecutor circled this in red, it said, So these are all being denied due to lack of medical necessity. No, unfavorable was on the bottom of the first page. On the bottom of the last, see, between the two of us, we remember most everything. Unfavorable was at the bottom of the first page. On the bottom of the last page, and he circled it in red, is that these claims are all denied based on lack of need for medical treatment, and that was a score. Okay. That's one of the risks you run in taking the stand. Overall, and bear in mind, I don't know how big that's going to resonate with the jury, because in the totality of all of this, there's no way they didn't see, y'all are just literally beating up on this man. Y'all are literally doing the testifying for him and just telling him to say yes or no to very, very leading questions. And I was actually glad Dr. Akula at one point said, look, you're putting words in my mouth.
Well, you know, I to the point, Robert, of what you just said, what the government, you know, they wanted to circle it in red.
They did circle it in red.
It also came out that, you know, with their expert witness, that, you know, that the reason for a lot of the errors or, you know, the problems that they were having with the building was because it wasn't, you know, there was some glitches in regards to how the information was being reported, you know, so and that's where Dr. Akula, you know, had all the faith and trust in his administration, which was Mrs. Sume, that would know what she was doing on how that information was supposed to be reported so that it can be billed properly. Well, so when the prosecution kept asking him, you know, on the cross, if
Akula was on the stand, it's got to be cross.
It's got to be cross. He was saying that, oh well, you know, every time he would say, you know, you're the boss, you know, you was in control. You're
the ultimate. You're the ultimate.
You're responsible. And Dr. Akula was, you know, I mean, just very adamant about getting him not to put words in his mouth, because he was saying that that's the reason why I paid this woman $140,000 a year to administrate on, in these, this operation. Yeah. You know, I wasn't, there breathing down the back of somebody's neck that's getting paid $140,000 a year. So he basically, Dr. Akula just let them know that, I'm a doctor. I am concerned about whether or not patients are being released too soon, or whether or not they should be released at all. He said because we had already received the infraction.
Right, that's another good point. The state cited them for making a too premature discharge. So you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't on some of this stuff. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So Dr. Akula was trying to let him understand, I am concerned about how my company is operating, and whether or not I do need to make some drastic changes in how or who have to go and who have to stay in regards to how my company is going to be in good standards.
Correct. Now I want to emphasize another point in the response that Dr. Akula gave. The prosecutor kept repeatedly saying, now look, you've been through this whole trial, Dr. Akula. You've seen all these witnesses that we've brought in here that have said that these claims should not have been paid. So, and he wanted to say, what percentage of your business comes from Medicare? And he had said, well, I don't know. And he said, he tried to really get him, common sense dictates it's going to be a lot, okay? Right. But he said, so you don't see it as you having charges that should not have been paid and thereby boosting your income. And he said, no. He said, I have learned a lot through all of this. And so finally he broke down, the prosecutor did, and said, well, Dr. Akula, is it your testimony that Sume is the only person responsible for all of this? You remember? And he said, probably so.
Absolutely.
So
we have tomorrow off.
We do.
Yeah,
we do.
Friday off.
Because there is one more defense witness, and that's going to be an expert witness.
On Monday.
Now, it was already preset that gentleman would arrive on Monday, and so now I got to hand it to Judge Afric on his sense of humor. And when I said he had a dry sense of humor, maybe that was just an initial thing. We now know that he makes some incredible jokes, and so he told the jury, he said, okay, here's the situation. And he said, we have now had the prosecution wrap. We have the defense. That unfortunately, there's one more witness that's we're not going to be able to hear until Monday. So may I assume that you all would like to just come, sit in those jury boxes, and after a prolonged period, take a break. And they all started laughing. And he said, yeah, I kind of didn't think so. So he said, so the bottom line is, we've got tomorrow off.
Yes.
So I'm sure they will appreciate a 3-day weekend.
Hopefully Monday they do by the end of the day.
Well, you talking about when they get it?
After the expert.
Or after the expert in the closing arguments, and he
right.
gives the instructions.
Right.
He kind of indicated that it'll be late afternoon Monday. Right now, anything could change before it is placed into the hands of the jury. And he told the jury, now look, if it is in the late afternoon, if you see you're making progress or you may be coming to a consensus, this courthouse will remain open, into late into the night. And I've seen that many times. And he said, if not, well, don't hesitate to say, look, we need to come back in the morning and start fresh on it. And he said, if you do stay, we'll certainly provide an evening meal.
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty decent recap of today.
Well, hopefully, if I'm hoping that we will have a verdict on Monday. Robert, what you think? I think overall we may get a verdict on Monday. I hope
we might.
So.
We might.
Because the way this thing is going, it's just that the government. I think it was a rush to.
Well, in my opinion, despite the fact that they did get some advantage to cross-examining Dr. Akula, I don't think they thought there was a 0.5% chance that they were going to end up getting that opportunity, and I don't think they were quite prepared for it.
They was not prepared for it.
And when all these defense exhibits started getting in that had this not happened would not have gotten in, I could just see a lot of scrambling around,
Right, they were scrambling around.
Because you got to realize Dr. Akula has himself one attorney, Mr. David, and then the other attorney's first name is...
I can't think
well,
of
we're
his
drawing a
name.
blank now, but he's the Louisiana-based attorney. But it's been Attorney David that has had to do all of the arguing. But you got to realize over here on the government side, you got
it's a whole thing.
You got an entire table. You got FBI folk. You got people on the first row that are more FBI folk. Who knows what some of these people in the audience are?
Right.
I mean, I wouldn't know who the U.S. attorney himself, not an assistant.
Right.
I wouldn't know what he looks like down here. So I mean, he may be in the courtroom. I don't know. I know one thing, there were a lot more people in there today than there's been in past days. So thank everyone for the dedication. While the viewership hadn't been through the roof on all of this, this is the kind of thing that for obvious reasons, because of my prior vocation, as we mentioned on Monday, I may be a strange duck, but I enjoy these type trials. I would prefer it be a civil trial, but it is what it is. It's a criminal trial.
Well, it's a whole lot of moving parts to this case.
Yeah.
So I just want to say my appreciation to Sound Off Louisiana, and stay tuned for would it be day 5? Because this is day 4.
It'll be day 5, and it may be over on day. It might be over on day 5. So,
right.
Man, who knows? The mainstream media may say, "Ooh, the verdict will come down on Monday." Probably would. We'll show up for that. So.
All right, Robert. Thank you.
All righty. You have a safe trip back to Slidell. I'll do the same to Baton Rouge, and we can sleep in tomorrow.
All right.
All right. We'll see you next time for another edition of Sound Off Louisiana. Thank you so much.